still sounds a lot better than Love Island to me. Here's Jimmy's review of one of my favourite films from the 1980s.
Hiya! Welcome! A couple of weeks ago, Leroy Screwballs and I had the idea of reviewing each other's favourite movie. His being Tombstone from 1993, mine being 24-Hour Party People from 2002. Really enjoyed doing the review of Tombstone. You can of course see that in my various shish playlist. Yes, I said shish. I really wanted to do another movie review, but obviously do it where I'm watching a movie I've never seen before, and one of my friend's favourites. So Lee Teasdale, the Pop-Tart, got in touch with me, and he said, do you want to review my favourite film? And I can review not 24-Hour Party People, A, because he'd already seen it, and he does like it, and B, because it would be kind of samey having people see reviews of 24-Hour Party People come up, much as I love the film. So I said, yeah, I'll pick another one of my favourite movies. So to find out what that movie is that Lee Teasdale has reviewed, and his review should be going up around the same time as this video. It's going to be linked at the top of my description. Go and check that out. It's another one of my, I would say, top 5, maybe even top 3. I'm here today to tell you all about Tarty's favourite movie. Or one of his favourites. I don't know if it's his very favourite, but he said this is one of his favourites from the 1980s that isn't part of like a sci-fi franchise, you know, so it's not Star Wars or Marvel or anything. And the movie in question that I'm talking about is from 1987, and it is The Running Man. So The Running Man is an action film from 1987. Its lead star is Arnold Schwarzenegger. By the way, I'll try not to give any spoilers. In fact, I won't give any spoilers, and I'll put no spoilers in the video title as well. So, The Running Man is an action film sort of set in a dystopian future. Made in 1987, or released in 87, probably filmed in 86, presumably. Set in 2017, so set in kind of modern times. Obviously, it's got that sort of slightly amusing mid to late 80s aesthetic where they sort of try to predict the future, but still using things like CRT screens and BBC Micro and Commodore 64 graphics and stuff. But, you know, that's kind of charming. I'm not scoffing at that. I kind of like that when things like that happen, when you see really old TV and film that's set or trying to portray a point in the not too distant future, and some things they're just not getting quite right, but they haven't got foresight, so they can't get it right. The basic plot of the movie, as best as I can describe it, is the USA, or at least California, is in 2017, it's like a post-apocalyptic dystopian sort of police state. The government, they run the TV network there, and the most popular show is a game show, a very violent and kind of bloodthirsty game show called The Running Man. Running Man is loosely based on a novel by someone called Richard Bachman. That is a name that won't really sound familiar, certainly didn't to me, but it is actually a pseudonym of the famous horror writer Stephen King. So this is based on a Stephen King story. So Arnold Schwarzenegger, like I say, he's your main star. He plays a police helicopter pilot called Ben Richards. He refuses to intervene and kill a load of people who are rioting in Bakersfield, California over a lack of food. He's in his helicopter with his police co-workers, and you know, they give him a good eye and he throws a few punches back. But the upshot of it is he gets arrested for disobeying, and then he gets framed as like someone who killed all these rioters and people who were starving in Bakersfield anyway. In this 2017 dystopia, this alternate universe, the government are able, or the TV network, which is run by the government essentially, is able to produce video that's false. It's like they can use false imagery, and they can show that Ben Richards, Arnold, killed all these people, or it was his decision to massacre all these people in Bakersfield, when in fact he actually didn't do that. And that's a plot point that kind of becomes more pertinent sort of manipulation of video, fake news, I suppose you could call it. I don't like that term. One thing that I found quite interesting about The Running Man was the sort of eclectic co-stars. I mean, Arnie's obviously got the biggest role, but there's some people with smaller roles who are quite interesting to me personally. Mick Fleetwood, he plays a guy called Mick, funnily enough. Mick Fleetwood, for those who don't know, and why don't you, he is the drummer for Fleetwood Mac. And it's quite amusing, really, because this is 1987. I think Mick Fleetwood himself would be about 40 or so at this point, but he's done up in the movie to look like how he would look in 2017, or today, essentially, as that was only 3 years ago. So they've kind of aged him in the movie, which is quite an interesting little touch. Another actor that I'm familiar with who was in this was someone, and I think I'm pronouncing his name right, Yaphet Kotto. He's more familiar to me as Kananga from the James Bond film Live and Let Die. Brilliant Bond movie, by the way. Although I think I knew that this guy was in this film, I'd kind of forgotten, and it's like, oh yeah, he's in this, I do remember now. Former professional wrestler, although I'm more familiar with his body of work as a professional wrestler announcer. Jesse the Body Ventura, he plays a former stalker called Captain Freedom, I think his name is. A stalker, by the way, is like the sort of, they're a bad guy in the film, but to the audience watching in the studio and watching at home, the stalkers in the game show The Running Man are like the good guys, because they're the ones who are usually defeating and murdering the contestants. Still near at the start of the film, Ben Richards, he breaks out of prison, like this detention camp, and he sneaks into his brother's apartment complex. He's disguised as a construction worker or electrician or somebody. But his brother's disappeared somewhere, missing, presumed dead, I think. His brother's apartment that he's broke into is now occupied by an attractive lady, sort of Spanish extraction, called Amber, who is a musician apparently. I can't remember the name of the actress, so I'll put it on screen. It's Maria something. She's like a Venezuelan singer who's done a lot of acting as well. She's had quite a long career. So she's the main female lead. Ben Richards takes Amber hostage. He attempts to flee with Amber to Hawaii, but she gets away from him at the airport and alerts security that Ben Richards, because his mug's been flashed all over the telly, has been someone who is a criminal who's broken out of prison and therefore is dangerous and needs to be apprehended by the police. So he gets rearrested, he gets sort of put in police custody, and then this is where Damon Killian, who's played by, what's his name, Richard Dawson, he comes in. He's the host and the creator of the Running Man show, and he says, rather than go back to prison, will you do my show? And Arnie, I don't want to call him Ben because he's Arnie in everything, isn't he? Arnie says, no, I'm not interested. And Killian says, well, I've got you two friends, because he broke out of prison with two friends, Yaphet Kotto, who I mentioned before, and another guy who I wasn't familiar with. He says, well, I'm going to put you two friends in, and obviously 9 times out of 10 being on this programme leads to certain death. It's a very sort of violent show, and the contestants, the public, are generally people who have been picked who have got some sort of criminal record, be it justly or not. And Arnie says, no, I'm not going to do it, and Killian says, well, I'm going to put your two friends in if you don't. And so Arnie, feeling kind of blackmailed into doing it, says, okay, I'll be in your show, I'll do it. And then, as we see in a little bit, his two friends are also put in the game as well. This guy Killian, the main bad guy, he's telling lies and just being very manipulative and blackmaily and stuff. And he's a very supercilious character, very slimy, sort of like your typical American entertainment sleazeball, really.
Right, without further ado, it's time to start running! On your marks, get set.
Killian, I'll be back.
Only in a rerun. Go!
The object of the game is, if I can describe it, there's stalkers. They're like these sort of recurring characters. Think of a bit like sort of a cross between a gladiator from the old ITV or American series Gladiators, crossed with a professional wrestler, really.
Show so far, right?
These stalkers are these celebrities, if you will, who are basically psychopathic, and they're chasing down these supposed criminals who are the contestants who are just trying to survive, and they're obviously known as the runners, the contestants. That's pretty much all I can say about the film before I start getting into plot spoiler territory. Right, so my thoughts. Well, let's start with the elephant in the room, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I've never been a massive fan. I like the Terminator films, Terminator 2 especially, and Terminator 1 was decent, and yeah, Terminator 3 was a bit sort of ropey, but it was watchable. But the trouble for me with Arnold Schwarzenegger is he's always just playing Arnold Schwarzenegger, up to a point where it's actually kind of funny, really. I mean, for God's sake, his name in the film is Ben Richards, yet is this guy talking with a thick Austrian accent. I mean, that's what you got to love about Arnie. I mean, all these years, I mean, he's been a naturalised US citizen for many years now, and he's just not lost that accent at all, has he? And, you know, he just hasn't got another accent, another voice to do in movies, has he? I know it's a running joke, but I just don't associate him with serious cinema. You know, action flicks, or something like this that I think's quite tongue-in-cheek, really. I'd have probably liked to have seen someone else in that main role, really, rather than a guy called Ben Richards, played by a guy who just, you know, obviously is from Central Europe. And I know that's not the only Arnie film where it's like that, so fair enough. He did all the action scenes well, and he looks the part, certainly with his big muscles and his imposing frame, but nah. It was just all kind of silly, really. And that's the trouble with this movie. It is silly, really. It's not a comedy, but obviously there's bits in there that are meant to make you laugh. There's a lot of puns in, and they're very sort of really stupid puns too.
Give you a lift? No! Here is Sub-Zero! Now, Plane Zero! Don't forget to send me a copy.
Get it to make it on the Underground Jamming Network.
Jam the network.
That's right.
Jam it up your ass. That's all right. Keep it.
What happened to Baza?
He had to split.
Just some of Arnold Schwarzenegger's lines in this are just kind of really shit, to be honest. It's an interesting premise for the movie. Set in a near future, obviously 1987, 2017 was 30 years away. One scene I enjoyed that they got right, kind of got right, but when you saw Amber, the female character, in her apartment for the first time, she's sort of using voice activation to turn on her lights and a TV and stuff, and obviously that was a really good bit of predictions, really, as we have all that now with, I mean, I have it in my home. I can turn my lights on and off with my voice thanks to the magic of Amazon Echo. I did like that because it was like, oh yeah, well that's something that came true, that's something that came to pass. Obviously it looked different. The other character I think was probably the best character in terms of sort of like having a more fuller personality was Richard Dawson's main antagonist, Damon Killian, the Running Man game show host. You know, I think that he played a really good part, really sort of slimy and sleazy and unlikable and just really dishonest. Kind of like this really sort of cross between a used car salesman and a sort of American Noel Edmonds, really. I need to be fair and say that he was probably the best character and Richard Dawson probably the best actor in the whole thing as well. A lot of violence in this, unsurprisingly. It sort of reminds me, it seems a very stereotypical 80s action flick where they just try to get all the sort of slightly cartoony violence that kind of looks a little bit realistic, but will dub some funny sound effects on it, and you've got Arnie making his daft puns at the end of doing something to some guy. This isn't the sort of film that I choose to watch particularly. I do like certain action films. One of my favourites is The Rock, the one starring Nicolas Cage and Sean Connery, and that's silly in places, but I mean that is just such a roller coaster ride from start to finish. I mean, this, I see the concept, but it was very violent, quite misogynistic in places. I think the fact that none of the female parts in this were written very well doesn't help, but you've got Arnold Schwarzenegger, the first time Ben meets Amber in her apartment that he thinks is still his brother's. She's dressed quite skimpily, and then he ties her up, and a bit later on there's kind of a threat where like, oh, you know, if you don't come with me, I'm going to hurt you sort of thing. It's sort of a quite unpleasant male threatening behaviour that's fair enough for the time, but it wouldn't really fly if you tried to put stuff like that in a film in 2020, certainly. I think there'd just be too many complaints instantly, really. But, you know, these were different times. It was over 30 years ago when this was made. So, I think I've probably gone on long enough about The Running Man. Can I recommend it? Yes and no. I don't rate it as a decent film or a really good piece of cinema, but it is watchable, and it is something that I think, if you've got a passing interest in the 1980s or in kind of dystopian sci-fi futuristic action, then yes, you should give it a watch and you may love it. Lee Teasdale, the Pop-Tart, certainly loves it, so I'm probably in a minority. I think at the time Running Man got mixed reviews, but I don't tend to pay any attention to the reviews. And the movie that Lee Teasdale's going to be reviewing is an interesting one, because that is like a really low budget indie thing that I chose. And that's another one I think if you watch it you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. So I'm really excited to see what Tati says about it. I can't say too much good about it, apart from odd bits, like some of the predictions about the future were quite sort of spot on if done a little cack-handedly. And Richard Dawson was good in it. I really rated the character of Killian. I think, you know, he was a perfect bad guy for this particular film. Arnie was Arnie, and I can't take him seriously in pretty much anything that he's in, apart from maybe The Terminator. And I think my overall score for this, I was going to be really mean and give it 3 out of 10, but it is watchable, and it does pass like an hour and a half, an hour and 40 minutes. So I'm going to be a little kinder to the Pop-Tart and to all the makers of this film and everyone involved, and be a little kinder and give it 4 out of 10. So it's just below average for me. It's watchable, but don't get your hopes up, is what I'm saying. So there we are. That was my movie review. Thank you all for watching, if you stuck with me this long. Thank you to the Pop-Tart for suggesting I watch The Running Man. And like I say, please will you watch his review of another of my favourite movies, linked at the top of the description. Thank you to all of you for watching and subscribing, and all my patrons, of course. I'd love to do another movie review, so if any of you out there want to try this sort of collaboration where we pick a film that each other likes that we haven't seen before, watch it for the first time, and then give a review here, then please get in touch with me via all the usual methods, and we can talk about that. But I'm going to go now, and I do hope that all of you will join me again next time for my next movie review. Cheers, everyone. See ya!